Hello, everybody. What's up? And welcome to the Midwestern Marxists. Tonight's a really exciting night for all of us. It's all about Du Bois tonight. We're going to go over a paper that Carlos wrote about Du Bois and why we call him the father of American Marxism. And we're going to do that right after this.
All right, how's it going, everybody? It is super good to be back with my two brothers, Carlos and Noah. It has been a hot minute. I've been extremely busy. Carlos has been traveling the world. Noah has been extremely busy at work. We've all been busy with our respective jobs and hobbies and things that we do to support ourselves outside of Midwestern Marx. But we've all coalesced here for an awesome live stream. We're going to be talking about a great scholarly article that Carlos did about W.E.B. Du Bois, which we all just got done reading. Shout out to Carlos for that one. Obviously, I'm biased, but I thought it was amazing. Shows without a shadow of a doubt that Du Bois was really using the Marxist materialist method, even if he wasn't, saying out loud that that's what he was doing. And the article also talks about how all these forms of struggle, whether struggle against racism, struggle for national self-determination, are in fact class struggles, which I think there's a lot of parallels there if we look at what's going on in Palestine, where maybe there are these groups fighting for national self-determination who don't share our ideology. But it's still a class struggle because you're looking at an oppressed people banding together and fighting against what is ultimately capitalist imperialism. Which ultimately the state of Israel is a neo-colonial outpost for Western capitalist powers in the resource-rich West Asian region. So we will discuss that. We'll discuss a couple of the biggest stories coming out of Palestine and Israel over the last few weeks. But yeah, how's it going, guys?
No, you want to go first, and then because I have a few things to say. I just had a very exciting trip to Mexico, so
Yeah, I'm great. I am very excited that my busy season at work is now over, so I can dedicate myself more fully to the institute. Big things like projects coming. We're getting underway right now. I'm sorry, like my brain is right now just focused, like all on that MLK clip at the end of our intro. There's a bit where he goes like this, like just a thought, and like place his thought, and it's just the way it comes off is incredible. He just makes him look like a badass as he's speaking. So I'm sorry, I'm sort of my brain's all over the place. But regarding this paper, I've read a lot of Carlos's work, and I've read a lot of papers on Du Bois and on class struggle in America. And this is by far my favorite. And we've been discussing this notion of Du Bois as the father of American Marxism for a long time now. And sort of slowly putting all these pieces together. Like, why was Du Bois who he was? How did he take us forward? And why was it that back then we couldn't understand that? Everyone in the Communist Party was basically a student of Du Bois, and yet he wasn't viewed as a Lenin type, when that's absolutely where he is. And this paper does that, right? It ties all that together. It explains the Marxism of Du Bois, like Eddie was saying, and how what he does at times is pick up where Marx leaves off, right? And he's using the logic of Marx and extending that to the particular of the US. And we'll get into all that in a minute. I just really want to say, fantastic work, brother. Congratulations. We're all so proud of you.
Thank you so much, brother. Yeah, I just want to reiterate what both of you have said. It's such a pleasure to reconvene here. I don't know how long it's been, maybe a few weeks, maybe a month, but it's I love doing these, and it's been a solid 2 weeks and some change since I've been able to hop on one of these. Primarily because I had this big trip to Mexico. I just got back from Mexico last night. I had a couple conferences. The first one on the Monday I got there was at a university at the outskirts of Mexico City, one of the poorest places in Mexico City, but it was incredible to see. And I gave a presentation on the American political system and the 2024 elections at this university called the Autonomous University of Ciudad de Mexico, of Mexico City, UACM in Spanish. And it was all done in Spanish, which was new to me. As the audience I'm sure knows, I was born in Cuba. I got here very young, and most of my professional work has always been in English. So doing that in Spanish was definitely something very much new. But that Monday presentation that I gave at the UACM was just beautiful because it was jam packed. There was maybe 20 people standing in an auditorium of close to 60, 75 seats, maybe more. And they definitely showed what one of Du Bois's characters in The Souls of Black Folks had, which was Josie. He's got this story where he goes down south to build a school, and it's like the third chapter of The Souls of Black Folk. I wrote about it earlier this year because it was the 120th anniversary of the book. And this girl Josie, she's a young black woman who's got this insatiable thirst for knowledge, and Du Bois is able to satisfy that in the period that he's there teaching. But the story skips to 10 years after when he comes back, and they basically tell him that she died from literally overworking herself to help the family sustain itself materially. And it's like this: you have a mixture of this insatiable thirst to learn and to study, but then the difficulties of the material conditions. And I saw that there. These were kids that were very poor. They were living in a part of Mexico City that was extremely crime ridden, where the cartel was there and all that sort of stuff. But they were more attentive than I've ever seen an audience be. They were all taking notes. They were all shaking their heads whenever, key points were made. The questions were terrific. Some of them stayed back after the lecture to talk to me for a while. So it was an incredible experience. And the Thursday after that, I got to do a panel at the larger university, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, fairly well known institute in Latin America. And I got to discuss a topic that we're currently uploading the presentation now to show itself at 11 p.m. Central Time. It's basically on the crisis that we're currently going through in the U.S. and my critique of the left, which is rooted in the purity fetish. So if you understand Spanish, I definitely recommend that you check that out. There was also two other presentations, one from a comrade named Oscar, PhD in economics. Beautiful, beautiful presentation on the current context geopolitically and in terms of geoeconomy, how the economy is shifting and we're seeing a qualitative change in terms of the global forces. And then another one from Beatriz Raglan, who's just a historic figure. I got to talk about her with Eddie yesterday. It's someone who has met Fidel, Raul, Che, good friends with Chavez, got to meet Dolores Ibarru, all the key revolutionary figures. She studied in the Soviet Union, just a legend in the communist movement out of Argentina. She
Carlos,
was
your
able to,
mic cut off. Oh, it's back.
yeah, she was able to talk about the.
Oh, we lost him again.
Yeah,
Hello?
Carlos, give it a second and let the camera catch up.
I can hear you now.
Is it back?
Yeah, it seems like you're lagging.
Okay. Well, it was a great presentation from the other two panelists. So if anyone understands Spanish and is willing to check that out, I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah, for sure. The Argentinian lady you were telling me about was just amazing. I posted a picture of you and her on my Instagram story recently because I just thought her story was so cool. A lady who had met with Che and had got to see Fidel in person. So, I mean, really amazing. You got to think there aren't that many people who have actually met Che Guevara still alive today, let alone communists, especially if you consider Operation Condor, the Bolivian and Argentinian military juntas, Pinochet's Chile, where they were just killing and torturing communists en masse all throughout Latin America. Wiped out, unfortunately, a lot of the revolutionary spirit of the people for a while, which is now regaining steam, of course. But yeah, it was just really cool to hear from these legends of the communist movement.
Definitely that connection between our heroes and back then and now is absolutely important. And it's really sad that we in the US, that connection is kind of broken apart. There aren't many people today around that can talk about when they were in meetings with Fidel. And, it's even the people who learned from Du Bois, who we're going to be talking all about, very few of them left in this world. And so when you get an opportunity to meet someone like her, that's absolutely amazing.
For sure. Am I muted? Oh, no, I'm not muted. I thought
No,
I
you're
muted
good.
myself. Yeah, definitely. I want to I want to wait for Carlos to be back before we jump into the segment, but we have so many good segments today. Of course, the part of the reason we haven't been streaming lately is because I've just been pumping out TikTok videos, mostly because of the viral potential that we have on those TikToks, which be sure to like and share the stream so we can grow our stream audience. Obviously, these go way more in depth and are way more educational than our TikTok videos. But there was a tweet from Boots Riley, who is a famous communist actor and singer, the mind behind The Coup, which is one of my favorite bands of all time. And he had heard this propaganda talking point that we've probably all heard at this point, that it says in Hamas's charter, in their political charter, their founding documents, that they want to erase all Jewish people, that they want to get rid of all Jewish people. So obviously that would be an anti-Semitic sentiment. And Zionists are saying that, using it to justify Israel's carpet bombing of the Gaza Strip that's now killed an estimated 3,000 children and over 8,000 civilians in total. However, Boots Riley actually went and read the founding documents or Hamas's charter the last time they were updated, which was in 2017. And he found that not only does it not say that they want to get rid of all Jewish people, but it says the exact opposite. So here's the TikTok I just posted before we went live that already has 7,000 views. Shout out to the pro-Palestinian activists on TikTok giving that a good boost.
So a lot of Zionists have been saying that Hamas's founding charter calls for getting rid of all Jewish people, and they've used this as justification for Israel's murderous actions in the Gaza Strip. But the famous communist actor and singer Boots Riley wanted to look this up, so he went and read Hamas's charters from 2017, which explicitly says that their struggle is not against Jewish people and they want the borders from 1967, meaning the borders that existed prior to the Arab-Israeli War, which seized a lot more Palestinian territory. And of course, this would still allow the state of Israel to exist. Another propaganda talking point from Zionists that's been debunked, calling for getting rid of all Jewish people. So this is yet another propaganda talking point from Zionists that's been debunked. You should ask yourself, why do they have to lie to you in order to justify the missile strikes and carpet bombing of the Gaza Strip? If their actions were actually justified, why wouldn't they just tell the truth? So a lot of Zionists...
So very interesting and hilarious that Israel has been lying about this charter, and all you have to do is go and read it, and it says the opposite. Already, one of the top comments on here says, "I'm so glad you're speaking out about this. I read their charter the other day and was amazed by what it actually says," which makes sense. I mean, there's so much, frankly, Islamophobic propaganda about any kind of, Muslim majority political groups. Whether it be Hamas or whether it be Hezbollah, and they're so demonized that by actually reading what they want, actually reading their charters, you see through a lot of the American propaganda about them. And here's Boots Riley's full tweet. They say the struggle isn't against Jews and they want the 1967 borders, which would obviously allow a huge chunk of what was formerly Palestine to remain as the Israeli state. This is direct quotes from Hamas's 2017 charter. Hamas affirms that its conflict is with the Zionist project, not with the Jews because of their religion. Hamas does not wage a struggle against the Jews because they are Jewish, but wages a struggle against the Zionists who occupy Palestine. Hamas rejects the persecution of any human being or the undermining of his or her rights on a nationalist, religious, or sectarian grounds. So Israel and Netanyahu have just been completely lying about this and completely lying about what Hamas says in their founding charter. And I added the point in another tweet on my personal account here that most people who support Palestine understand that European anti-Semitism is largely what drove Zionism and the creation of the Israeli apartheid state throughout the 30s and 40s and onwards, because that allowed Zionists to say we need a state, we need a Jewish state to protect us from something like the Holocaust. So most Palestinian advocates are strongly against anti-Semitism and make that distinction of, no, we are not against the Jewish people, we are against the state of Israel, which is an apartheid state and a Western colonial project that's committing ethnic cleansing against Palestinians.
Yeah, I've done so much work with within this sphere, and I'm of Jewish ethnicity. I've never been kicked out of a place. There are no anti-Semites within these organizing spaces that I've ever seen. So this idea that it's just, and this is the sort of idea that the ruling class here is trying to spread, that there's this giant wave of anti-Semitism just sweeping the nation, that people just hate Jews all of a sudden. You see, like all of these celebrities, I quote tweeted Jim Gaffigan, that comedian earlier today, because he was saying, don't you get the urge to call all your Jewish friends just to make sure they're okay? Like, what? We're fine, buddy. Don't worry about it. If you left your gated community and saw how people act, you would see nobody cares who's Jewish and who's not. What we care about is the oppression and attempted extermination of an entire people. Last thing before I pass it to Carlos, because I know I'm rambling now. All of this builds, like Eddie was saying, on the narratives that were already in place. They have all of these sort of Islamophobic tropes that are able to fill in the blanks for people who don't look too hard into it. So when they say Hamas are all terrorists who want to kill all the Jews, that just helps reinforce that original Islamophobic trope, that racist stereotype, and basically lie, right? They work together that way. It's always connected. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, it's very interesting, and you know we've seen them explicitly say how necessary it is to make this connection. The connection that when someone criticizes Zionism, you equate that with anti-Semitism, and that's so absurd for quite a few reasons. One of which is the fact that Palestinian people are Semites. So another one is that a big chunk of the global Jewish population is against Zionism and the state of Israel. So when you equate being Jewish with Zionism, you're effectively removing from the character of being a Jewish person a big significant chunk of the global Jewish population, which is, I think, perhaps more anti-Semitic. The weird boomerang effects where by them saying that Zionism is the same as Judaism, the ones that, in my view at least, are somewhat anti-Semitic. Um, but these positions that they're taking are extremely dangerous and extremist, and it's interesting because then the whole narrative has been, it's Hamas, that's a terrorist extremist group trying to tie Hamas to ISIS and all of this. But there was a UN General Assembly vote, and I think, Eddie, you have that pulled up there.
Yes.
And a big chunk of the world, 120 votes, were voted in favor of a ceasefire, 14 against a ceasefire, a genocidal. Even the word ceasefire is kind of absurd because it's so disproportionate and asymmetrical that, and if we were honest with language, are you voting for genocide? Are you voting against genocide? Or are you going to stand on the side of genocide and effectively pass what would count as a vote for genocide, which I think is what the 45 abstentions effectively mean. But out of the 14 that,
My
just
bad.
out of the 14 that voted against, of course, the U.S. is in that list. And look at how Israel, Gilad Erdan, the ambassador of Israel, he said that this vote today is a day that will go down in infamy. So having the world democratically vote on whether this genocidal war against the Palestinian people should stop is something that Israel conceives of as an infamy. So it's just completely absurd. It's a totally irrational uh, colonizing agent that you can't effectively use reason with them because their whole aims are exterminationist, and you can't base the extermination on the people on any rational principle. It's just completely irrational.
What's really should be infamous is the countries who voted against the ceasefire,
Yep.
or people like Bernie Sanders who claim to be anti-war progressives, who are now coming out and beating the war drums for the Zionist apartheid state. I mean, you want to talk about destroying your legacy as an American socialist figure. I mean, Bernie is almost beyond the pale at this point, and that's what's disgusting, But the Zionists have to flip reality on their heads, and the anti-Semitism argument has always been used to silence critics of Israel, but now you have these just disgusting pages like this page with the shit that they are posting. They should not be allowed to have a social media account. I'm sorry. All they do is dox people, share people's jobs, share people's locations, call for massive campaigns to get people fired like a bunch of fucking loser babies. I'm sorry, but if you're going to attack somebody's employment, somebody's job in a capitalist system, then you don't have a good enough argument in the first place, right? If you have to silence the people who are critical of Israel by smearing them as anti-Semites and getting them fired from their jobs, then you should maybe think that you're not the good guys anymore, that you're just trying to silence, valid criticisms. And we also had this. I'm not going to stop talking about this because it's one of the most disgusting statements I've ever heard from one of the most.
Before you move on to this, isn't that the people that are trying to come after Danny's job right now?
Probably.
I'm like 80% sure that's the fucking. Sorry to swear. Those are the fucking scumbags trying to come after Danny and his livelihood and his ability to take care of his family because he stands against genocide. That woman you just scrolled past.
Yes,
You know what they
Marxist
did to
Cretan
her?
is her name.
Her right there. They
Yes,
shared
Marxist
her
Cretan.
OnlyFans account with her entire family. How
Yes.
messed up is that?
They
Like, it's
shared
just
her personal Facebook page with her the town that she lives in as well, which I'm not going to show because I don't want to help dox
Right.
her.
Yeah, it's just disgusting. Whoever's running that is a complete cowardly scumbag. I dare them to try to come after me. I dare you. When you got no leverage.
And I wonder what kind of funding is going into this because it is an official NGO. They do have a big platform. Like all of their doxing posts get a lot of likes, and who knows if those are botted or what. But I mean, it's just disgraceful. These people are disgraceful. Imagine being this much of a coward that you have to come after people's employment and share their family information. You know, and Zionists love it. They love this account. So disgusting. And this was one of the most horrific statements I've ever heard from one of the most horrific human beings to ever walk this earth, Karine Jean-Pierre, a woman whose whole job is to do apologetics for genocide and for U.S. empire, and who acts like a condescending jerk to anybody who gives her pushback. Anybody who gives her a pushback or a critical question, she immediately treats like an idiot, like what they're asking is stupid. And recently she said that progressives calling for a ceasefire for an end to the violence are disgraceful and repugnant. So the people who didn't want 3,000 children to be massacred by the Israeli apartheid state are disgraceful and repugnant to her. I mean, have you ever seen a better example of projection in your life? This is a lady who lies in favor of genocide for a living, and she thinks you're disgraceful and repugnant because you want peace. I mean, these people worship war. These people are psychos. Don't tell me that the Democratic Party is so much better than the Republican Party, or the Democratic Party is any kind of left party. They think peace is disgraceful and repugnant. You are disgraceful and repugnant, Joe Biden. You are disgraceful and repugnant, Karine Jean-Pierre, and you have blood on your hands, the blood of innocent, cute little children who you are massacring in the Gaza Strip with our tax dollars every day.
And here's the worst part about it. They fucking know that. The lies, they're for us. They know exactly what's happening because to carry it out, they need the actual facts. All the lies and narrative manipulation, that's always just for the public to manufacture consent and get us to go along with it. And you know why they're lashing out and calling us all disgraceful and repugnant, etc.? Because for the first time in maybe half of a century, people aren't falling for it, right? You can look, they're losing the PR war on this. No longer is there giant media apparatus capable of giving a false reality in this accord. And that's gigantic. And they are fucking terrified of it. They are terrified of us. So for everybody watching this, keep it up. Don't stop. Don't let the pressure up. Just get louder. If you see one of Eddie's TikToks blow up, share it too. Anyone, you see the Richard Medhurst thing, share that. Spread it everywhere because the more we interact with each other, the more we're able to overcome that media domination they've always had. And I think Carlos is texting us, by the way.
Yeah, I wanted to say that part of the reason he's trying to relocate
Oh,
to get
yeah,
better
yeah.
Wi-Fi, but I want to say that part of the reason people aren't falling for it anymore is because of the work that Palestinian activists and people like James Ray, who we've had our disagreements with in the past, but that guy does TikToks about Palestine almost every day. You know, not just when the Israel-Hamas war kicked off, but every day, because before the war kicked off, Israel had been killing on average one Palestinian child per day, right? This is constant. The people of Gaza live in an open-air prison, a concentration camp where 97% of the water is undrinkable, and they're constantly facing violence and Israeli missiles. So people have been covering this day by day by day. So when the media jumps on it and starts covering it as soon as something pops off after ignoring it for years, there's a lot of people who know the history now. There's a lot of people who can't be lied to. And that's the power of knowledge and sharing knowledge and understanding the history of an issue. If you understand the conditions that created the Hamas-Israel war, it's much harder for them to lie to you about it. But I want to acknowledge the super chat that we got here from our buddy Sebastian. $5. Thank you so much. All of our institute funding comes from you, the audience, patreon.com/MidwesternMarks, or from the super chats. We greatly appreciate that. We have no big money donors or outside funders. So I'll let Noah finish out this segment if he wants, and then we'll go watch the Richard Medhurst video that Sebastian shared with us. And thank you for that, Sebastian.
Yeah, Sebastian's a hero. Thank you so much, brother. I just real quick want to mention that the most viral account on all of Twitter, the most popular platform like that, is an anti-Zionist, right? It's Jackson Hinkle. And every single day he's putting out anti-Zionist content. And this is what they're afraid of. That kind of thing is what they were afraid of. Us getting our shit together. I'm swearing a lot tonight, so I apologize. But us getting our shit together and overwhelming their media machine. This is the modern capitalist selling us the ropes that we hang them with. It's us using tools they design to beat them back and win hearts and minds.
Guys, I know I was out for a while. Sorry, I'm dealing with Wi-Fi issues, and I had to relocate to a place that's got not as nice of a background because none of my books are in the back. But I wanted to make a point. I don't know if you guys had a chance to make it already. But as Marxists, I think we should approach this question of the genocide against Palestine not only from a moralistic point of view. There's a lot of people that are doing that, and that's good. I mean, you should be morally appalled by the footage that we're getting out of Palestine. I know I am, especially as a father. When I see all these kids that are dying, some of them being held by their parents at ages that are like mine, 1-year-old kid. It's gut wrenching. It's soul crushing. So the moralistic part of it, should always be a component. But I'm reminded always of some phrases that Marx and Engels gave when similarly morally abhorrent things were going on, such as the colonization of Ireland by England, which was horrific. It claimed, millions of lives in something like the Irish famine, which perhaps even the word famine shouldn't be used. It was a lot closer to what the Ukrainian Nazis called Holodomor. The Irish famine was something that was intentional because Ireland was shipping out grain that was effectively being used as reserve food just in case there wasn't enough in England when there was people starving in Ireland. But that was a serious moral dilemma that could have had a moral angle and did. But also the question, of course, of African slavery in the U.S. South. In each of these cases, when Marx approached the question, he was very clear that, yes, we can have a moral argument against this, and that will move some people. But if you want to bring new people in, especially working people, what you have to do is show how it is that their self-interest is aligned with the struggle of these oppressed groups. In his case, whether it's the colonized Irish or whether it's, the black proletariat, as Du Bois would say, show how it is that at the level of self-interest, they can see the struggle of, in our case today, the Palestinian people, not as a struggle that I support because of these humanitarian moralisms and these other more middle-class reasons, but it's a struggle that I support because I know that in a Palestinian victory, I, as a working class person, oppressed and exploited and alienated by the same system that produces that in Palestine. I win when the Palestinians win. I lose when the Israelis win and when the Palestinians lose. So part of this angle that the Marxist analysis can bring to the table that can include new people. We've been very successful in bringing the youth to a pro-Palestine position, because they get the truth through the internet. Where there's a very clear generational divide in terms of who supports Israel in our country and who supports Palestine. But we can reach the base of working class Americans only if we're able to show that this isn't an issue that's just support them out of empathy. You could do that. But your interest as a working class person in a decaying American empire is the same as the interest of the Palestinians. It is fundamentally the same. It is the same system you're fighting against. The system that keeps you poor here, indebted, and miserable and immiserated is a system that's doing that to the Palestinians. That's a part of the analysis that I think only a Marxist outlook can bring to the table. And it's the part of analyzing the situation that can bring more new people into the pro-Palestinian, anti-imperialist, anti-Zionist fold.
Yeah, one of the videos I did the other day based on a conversation with some wrestlers was about how this isn't a religious conflict. And one of the wrestlers kept interrupting me and saying, yeah, but isn't it? And I'm like, no. Eventually, I was just like, shut up. You're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. And, explain how even since the Roman Empire, that region has been very resource rich. It's very important for trade. You're right next to that big sea that connects you to all the European countries. And it's very important from the perspective of production and distribution. Which is where the Marxist analysis begins from. Looking at production. The U.S. wants to control all the oil, resources, and trade in that region, and that's why they back Israel. Like, people think the U.S. is backing Israel because they hate Muslims. Like, the U.S. backed Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen. You know how many jihadist terrorist groups that they've stoked and kept alive and funded and armed in order to further their economic interests. But that's the thing. What's underlying U.S. policy is their economic interests, is their material interests, is the interests of capitalist imperialism that Carlos just broke down for us. And I think this will give us a good transition into this Richard Medhurst video that was shared by Sebastian. Shout out to Sebastian for the super chat. This is about the reasons behind the war on Gaza, which Noah also did a Twitter thread on. So we can work that in here to our analysis of this Medhurst video. But
what's really happening in Gaza and why it is happening. A few weeks ago, right before this war in Gaza ignites, Netanyahu goes to the United Nations General Assembly and he holds up this map and declares his plan for a new Middle East. And people are going, what is this stupid line this guy's drawing with a red marker? What it is an economic corridor that stretches all the way from India to the United Arab Emirates, into Saudi Arabia, into Jordan, Israel, and then finally to the entire European continent. I mean, the United States...
Sorry to stop it already, but what did I just say? What did I just say? It's about economics, and they want to open an economic corridor that gets them into South Europe. Follow the money, guys.
Who benefits? Who benefits?
And just to add this is a superiority of the Marxist analysis. There's some people that can get it accidentally, and when they do, they got right opinion. But when you have that method that says this is the core of every activity in society, you're able to guarantee that every time some shit like this goes down, you get it right because, as Eddie broke it down, you're following the money, you're following the system and the economic reasons behind why people act certain ways and why they have to create these absurd narratives and dehumanizations of people in order to get their interests through. If you consider the Palestinians human beings, as we all should, it's hard to legitimize a war like this. But if you consider them human animals or cockroaches, as the Israelis do, it's a lot easier, right? But it's not I think they're cockroaches, therefore it's okay to do this economic corridor that completely destroys the Palestinian nationhood. It's, I want to do this for economic reasons. That's why I need these ideas to help me legitimize these economic drives.
Oh, and to real quick, just bring it back and tie it into Bois, which is what we're trying to get to hopefully soon. It's just these things are too important. It wasn't racism that created slavery in the US. It was slavery that created racism. Not the consciousness of man that determines his social existence, but on the contrary, his social existence that determines his consciousness.
Absolutely. Shout out to Popers for gifting 5 Midwestern Marx memberships. That is huge. Thank you so much, Popers. Again, all of our funding at the Institute comes from Super Chats, from our Patreon supporters. It's all from the people, which is why we remain an institute by, of, and for the people. So thank you so much, Popers. Consistent viewer. What an awesome gift to give away 5 memberships. And members, you get access to our Discord. Check out the link in the community tab, and we'll never kick you out. So, all right, moving on.
Seeing their influence starting to fade, seeing the relevance of the dollar recede after they stole $300 billion from Russia. You have all these spooks in Washington and Tel Aviv, running around desperately trying to counter BRICS and counter China's New Silk Road. And this is their answer. This is a rival to the New Silk Road. Remember, the ancient Silk Road is the largest, most important trade route in human history. This thing is enormous. It stretches all the way from China to Syria to the Mediterranean Sea. The Chinese know how important this thing is, and they want to revive it. It is the future of world economics, trade, and politics. Within the span of a few weeks.
And by the way, there's been a massive military buildup by the U.S. Surrounding Syria. They launched missiles at Iranian proxies in Syria. Biden committed another $15 billion or so, some to go to Ukraine, some to go to Israel. The U.S. knows what's going on, and they're, pushing a massive military buildup in this region to do what? Protect their economic interests and their geopolitical interests, but the two are inextricably tied.
Yeah, I was on Nick's show from RBN the other day, and we talked about this in detail. If anyone's interested.
Yeah, check that out. It was a great appearance.
Iran and Iraq have signed a railway deal. So now you have a rail link for the New Silk Road. And President Assad of Syria, who the West have been trying to isolate for over a decade, is now visiting China, the world's largest economy, and signing a strategic partnership. This is pivotal. So now the New Silk Road has rail access all the way to the Mediterranean Sea through Syria's port in Latakia. So not just land, but maritime trade. This is crucial.
Can I say something about this? This is tied to what has become one of the most central questions for Marxists around the world and for communist parties, which is how are we going to read the rise of this multipolar world order? And us here at the Institute and myself personally, I think it's indubitable, as one of the words I'm fond of saying.
Are you fond of that word? I had no idea.
A little bit, yeah. The Cartesian in me loves it.
I still don't know what it means, but
just means without a doubt.
Yeah,
there's
like
no reason.
undoubtable, indubitable.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Thank you, though, guys.
But
thank you for mansplaining that to
me.
No, but it's clear for me that this seismic global shift, it's towards a more progressive, non-hegemonic world order that's got a combination of non-socialist developmentalist states and socialist developmentalist states, and that at the global scale, it does something that we've seen people like Mao theorize about, which is that it combines these two phases of development. The first one, which is kick out imperialism and neocolonialism, which takes the form usually of a collaboration with a progressive bourgeoisie, whether we like it or not. When countries that are not socialist within this BRICS camp do things like Syria is not socialist, but the way that they're acting on a global scale is how a socialist country in their position should be acting. But the first phase of these struggles are kick out empire, ally with a national bourgeoisie that is anti-imperialist, that is nationalist, to do this. And then the second phase of the empire, that's when the internal class contradictions heighten and the struggle for socialism becomes more acute. that double phase that we've seen and that people have theorized about within national context, I'm seeing that, and other comrades are seeing that at a global geopolitical scale. And so it's clear to me that what we have here with this new Silk Road, with the rise of BRICS Plus, and all of this, is a movement towards a post hegemonic world order that is ideologically and materially diverse and heterogeneous, and that even in the places where there are not communist parties in power or workers' parties in powers, the internal class struggles within those countries will become more acute in a similar fashion to how when there's political revolutions within nations and these democratic struggles succeed, the Leninist position has always been that what ends up happening is that the class struggle becomes more acute. You can no longer blame certain inequalities and certain oppressions on various specific ways that the bourgeoisie divides the working class. You have to, by the own necessity of the material conditions, blame the system itself and the central contradiction within that system between labor and capital. So it's this whole thing, it's not just, oh, this ideologically relevant, it's moving history forward, and it's functioning in a way that, whether it's conscious of it or not, is helping us advance towards socialism, even in the places where there's not a socialist or communist party in power. Sorry about the rant.
Important as all of this is just one aspect. This is just one aspect. You still have the gas. How can we talk about the Middle East without talking about gas and oil? When the US instigated the Maidan coup in 2014, that wasn't just about NATO expansion and encirclement of Russia. This was about surrounding, controlling, and cutting off Russian gas to Europe. Russia is the country with the largest proven reserves of natural gas. Control Ukraine, and you control the pipelines that feed and supply Russian gas to Europe. For decades, you've had US politicians, Republican and Democrat, from every administration, openly saying on camera, we don't want Nord Stream.
There will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
You want to have pipelines that don't go through Ukraine and Russia. For years, we've tried to get the Europeans to be interested in different pipeline routes. It's time to do that. You want to depend more on the North American energy platform, the tremendous bounty of oil and gas that we're finding in North America.
Lo and behold, Nord Stream 1 and 2 are blown up. I mean, this is without question the most egregious, the largest terrorist attack on European infrastructure.
I was just going to say, what's so funny, too, is everything that Israel has done to the Palestinians is justified by saying they're terrorists. They're terrorists. Well, if they're the terrorists, what do you call a country that sabotages other countries' infrastructure and their oil pipelines and blows them up when it goes against their interests? That is a terrorist attack, as is the bombing of Al-Ali Hospital or mosques and churches, which Israel has been doing constantly. They are the terrorists. They are the terrorists. And all this propaganda comes down to projection, projecting the terrorist actions of the U.S. empire and the Israeli apartheid state onto the people who they're massacring and sabotaging.
And what's really wild is they blow up Nord Stream and then go, we didn't do it. Always ask the question, ask Lenin's question, cui bono, who benefits? Who benefits by blowing up that pipeline? They're telling you right there, they do. That is the last thing they want, is someone else cutting into the energy markets, because that's part of the only thing left propping up their monetary system, which is the only thing propping up their entire system, right? It's all based around this.
And the U.S., the sales of liquefied natural gas to Europe are just record breaking, because it's either that or the other option that Europe has been forced to take, specifically countries like Germany, which is continuing to buy Russian oil, but through a price hike that's mediated by the fact that it's bought by India and sold at a higher price to and it's completely destroyed the German economy that is spiraling towards deindustrialization, because all of their economic plans were centered on this fixed capital that they were assured was coming in the form of Russian oil that now they don't have the same access to as before.
For sure. Do you guys want to continue with it? Oh, Noah dipped out. Let's continue with the video for a little bit, then we'll bring in Noah's tweet about the same subject.
In modern history, there are only 3 countries on this planet that can pull this off. They are Russia, Britain, and the United States. And let me tell you, it was not Russia. You combine that with the sanction packages from the European Union, banning Russian oil and gas. I mean, talk about shooting yourself in the foot. So now there's no more Russian gas coming into Europe. And just like that, the United States have achieved a long-standing foreign policy objective.
Well, that's not necessarily true. It's still coming in, but through India and that price hike.
Yes.
Country with enormous gas reserves, the second largest in the world, is Iran. Iran signed the nuclear deal in 2015 and 2016. They're complying in every way imaginable. The IAEA at the UN cannot be happier. And then the United States, you know, the guys who orchestrated the whole deal, go back on their word and they rip it up just like that and reimpose sanctions on Iran. So now Iran is barred from selling its oil and gas to Europe and others.
Which was one of the most horrific things that Trump did during his presidency, pulling out of the Iran deal, a deal that gave the U.S. everything that they wanted, a deal that allowed Iran's nuclear weapons program to be monitored 24/7 by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, who never found a shred of evidence that Iran was working on creating nuclear weapons. The only thing that they had been enriching uranium for was medical isotopes, which is part of Iran's very advanced healthcare system, which in many ways kicks our healthcare system's ass. So, you know, just a completely belligerent foreign policy move by the neocons. But you see here the underlying reasons behind it. Iran is a threat to the U.S. Economically, which makes them a threat to the U.S. politically. They're a major part of this rising multipolar world, despite the fact that they're not, you know, what we would consider a socialist country. So, yeah, do you guys want to continue with this video or do you want to go to Noah's tweet?
We could move it along if you want. I think we got the gist of the video.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to bring in what Noah said here, saying, basically talking about the origins of the war. We said Palestinian liberation is the liberation of all. People in the West don't quite get this, at least not by what I've seen. You know the numbers. One question I've gotten asked by coworkers and family about this: why should I care? They're way over there. It's nothing to do with us. And beyond the empirical fact that they are fighting our enemy, the same enemy that impoverishes us here in the U.S., taking food out of our children's mouths to send weapons to Israel so they can engage in this disgusting extermination campaign, beyond the fact that it is what our morality instinctively requires of us, that we stand on the side of liberation and resistance against genocide and oppression, is because the struggle of Palestine is a focal point in the objective process that plays out in many times and places. That was a long sentence. Karl Marx would have been proud of that one. No, you got a lot of commas in there. It is very literally the class struggle. It is a form of class struggle, what's going on in Palestine. The Palestinian people are in a life and death struggle for their existence as who they are, the drive inside all of us to do nothing other than live a dignified life of personal fulfillment. That drive is in its most apparent form in this ongoing struggle. It is the struggle of free man against slaver, peasant against lord, proletarian against boss, free proletarian against bank, all of it, which reminds me of something Carlos said in his article about Du Bois, that national self-determination struggles and say struggles against racism, struggles against apartheid are forms of class struggle. And they can only be successful if they're viewed that way. The Palestinian people, you already read that. And we can recognize this struggle because it is a struggle of humanity to become humanity, happening in different forms throughout the historical epochs and in different regions. You know why Marx called the proletariat the future of humanity? It was because of this. And so the answer to why should we care is because the Palestinian people represent our entire class. Their fight is our fight. It is a class struggle against the capitalist ruling class, which is the imperialist class, which is the class driving all of this death and destruction because it suits their economic interests, as Richard Medhurst just explained to us. Proletarian internationalism is not a question of morality or of real politics. It is a question of understanding dialectical materialism. Gives us that the class struggle takes many forms and many times and places, and that there is always an alignment of forces. There is the side of the people and the side of the parasites. That line could not be more clear in the case of the struggle of Palestine. I know which side I stand on, which side do you stand on? True. And we've seen an alignment of forces with, the so-called left political commentators and the liberals, people like the Majority Report, people like Destiny, all these people who consider themselves on the political left, who have just, been doing nothing but propaganda for the Zionist apartheid state of Israel. And you have the right political pundits, the Ben Shapiro's of the world, also ardent Zionists. And it's because these, these political grifters who consider them, or who are considered left and right in the American political paradigm, are not actually left and right. They serve the ruling class. And when the ruling capitalist class is in trouble, like what's going on in Palestine, they all coalesce and align behind the ruling class, which is why we, as Marxists, as socialists, when we see these different forms of class struggle taking place around the world, need to align ourselves behind the working class, need to come together and have solidarity, because at the end of the day, while they have the money, the power, the influence, the media, we are more than them. We are greater in numbers, and we can beat their fucking ass.
We were just talking to Danny last night about that rally he was at in New York, where there were thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people in the street. And he said something that sticks with me. That stuck with me since then. I've been thinking about it. He said, when you're sitting there staring down the cops and there's thousands of people with you, the cops seem so small. And think about that. All the millions and millions and millions of us. And how many are there of them? A couple hundred? The power is here for us to take. The conditions they're here. People are ready. All that remains to do is for us to stand up, organize, and take it.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And we're seeing it around the world. I mean, the protests in Baghdad and in London, the ones that we had here in the U.S. and Texas. You guys seen the protests in Austin, Texas, and Houston. In New York, the one that Danny went to yesterday, they took the Brooklyn Bridge. 6 figures in terms of people there. It's insane. And the people of the world in the global South, they know that this is one of the things I mentioned, that I was in Mexico for a week. One of the things that I came back very clear on was it wasn't controversial to say in a room of 100 people that Israel is waging a genocide against the Palestinians. Everyone understood it. Everyone understood it. And people got emotional when I, as a speaker, was able to start talking about the bombing campaigns on hospitals, on schools, on churches, on routes that they said these are safe escape routes. It's ridiculous. At that time in the week, there was somewhere around 800 kids that had died. Now it's like 3-4 times that. So it's our youth is understanding it. The central question for us is going to be like, how do we get everyone else to do it? And I think we've been discussing it quite well, which is showing them why it's in their self-interest. If you don't appeal to people's self-interest, it's going to be very hard to get them on board.
Couldn't agree more. I also wanted to point out that Richard Medhurst covered that the NYPD was arresting anti-Zionist Jewish protesters. So maybe they're anti-Semitic, which is, the idea that all Jewish people have to support Israel and have to support the apartheid state and Zionism is in itself a, anti-Semitic idea. The idea that Jewish people are just a monolith who need to support mass murder and ethnic cleansing.
Not to mention, it is historical. Since the beginning of the notion of Zionism, it split Jews like down the middle. So many people have always been against it. And then, even within the Soviet Union, when we're not even speaking of Zionism, but an autonomous Jewish state within a socialist republic, that was controversial. And then one that becomes this imperialist monster because of the finance capital involved. That's a whole nother bag of bananas, my friends.
Bag of bananas. I had something else I wanted to say, but I forgot. We could probably wrap up that segment unless anyone
Welcome
else
to
has
my
any
world.
parting thoughts.
No, I'm good.
Sweet. You guys want to move into Du Bois talk or what next?
Yeah, let's do it. It only took an hour to get there.
Sorry.
You get the three amigos on, and we can go at it
Can't
for
help
7
ourselves.
hours. Yeah.
I would talk to boys all day, every day if I could. Can you sort of introduce the whole thing for us, Carlos, since it's your paper?
Yeah. So this is a paper that I've worked on for a very long time. It's called Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, the Black Worker, and Racist False Consciousness. I can link it for you all in the chat. Unfortunately, it was fortunately and unfortunately, it was published by Brill, which means that it's behind a paywall of like $40. But we're going to see how we can get at least the essential ideas in the paper out there to the public, because that's who I write for as a communist philosopher. But in this paper, I'm trying to do a wide variety of things, and I'm not going to say them all in this first point so that we can dialogue our way through some of the points. But I'm trying to make it known that uh, the notion of class struggle is plural. It's always class struggles. That famous phrase from the manifesto, the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles. It's plural for a reason. It's kind of absurd if people are guided by what some historians have called this white blind spot, that they can only see class struggle when they see like white workers fighting against their bosses in the factory. But then when there's like anti-colonial struggles or struggles against racism or anti-sexist struggles, they call that something completely different. Um, that's absurd. The first form that class struggle took in universal history, according to Engels at least, in the origins of the family, private property, and the state, a text that Eddie has done some guides on. I think he's pending on finishing it, but I know he's taught it twice back when we used to do classes with our Patreon members. But Engels says that the first form of class struggle is the struggle against patriarchy. That would blow up the vulgar and mechanistic minds of many Marxists who have a very shallow and reductive understanding of class. Marx understood the struggle of the Poles and the Irish and the black proletarians in the U.S. South. He understood those as class struggles. There were two of those that I mentioned were national struggles. The other one was a struggle against racist slavery, but he saw those as class struggles. He saw them as the victory of the U.S. North, the victory of proletarians in the South, black proletarians in the South. He saw that as the biggest success, along with the struggle of Russian peasants, the biggest movements towards freedom that the century had seen. Lenin then goes ahead and sees these anti-colonial revolutions in the global South as class struggles. So what's going on here at the philosophical level is that the notion of class struggle is this universal. It's this universal concept that, like all universals within the tradition of dialectics, can only exist if it takes different particular forms in accordance with different contexts. The idea that the Western philosophy has of universals is that the universal is that which is not the particular, so it is that which exists in the same form across space and time. We say that's bullshit. That universal is empty, it's meaningless. Universals for us take different forms, and class struggle is a universal in all forms of class society. And it takes different forms. And sometimes it takes the form of the struggle against racism, sometimes it takes the form of the struggle against national oppression, against sexism, or against a more acute form and visible form of labor against capital. And what I show in this paper is that Du Bois is the first person in the US to systematically provide an analysis of how it is that struggle against racism and the color line is the dominant form the class struggle has taken in the US up until that point. No one had done that before that. All of the analysis, whether it was from the Socialist Labor Party, from Weidmeyer, from the earlier Jeffersonian socialist, or from the socialist, from the Socialist Party and Debs, like all of these people, a lot of them were really, really great, but they ignored the struggle against racism. There's a book on the history of U.S. socialism. Not once is the emancipation of 4 million working class enslaved people in the U.S. South mentioned. Can you imagine that? Writing a history of socialism in the U.S. in the I think it was 1918 that was written, maybe a little less, and ignoring that struggle that was effectively a second American Revolution that led to a period of almost a decade where there was a dictatorship of the proletariat in the U.S. South. Not talking about that. And, these are mistakes that were done for a very long time. In my view, they were rectified by Du Bois, who I consider to be the father of American Marxism, because he takes the substance of Marxism, which is the method, applies it to the U.S., and has these conclusions that show how it is that the dominant form the class struggle has taken in the U.S. up until that point was the struggle against the color line. And this racism was what Marx called the secret by which the ruling class is able to sustain its power. So it's absurd to think that this thing that divides workers, when you fight against it, it's just a race struggle. No, it's a class struggle. And I'll leave it at there. There's a couple other points that I make concerning racist false consciousness and contextualizing a lot of these things in the world that we live in, which is 6 decades post the Civil Rights Revolution. But I'll leave it there for the purpose of dialogue.
Yeah, I think for anyone watching, if you've ever been confused when you hear us constantly say Du Bois is the father of American Marxism, this is what we're talking about. And one of the really cool parts in Carlos's paper is he makes it very clear that what we mean by this is that Du Bois is the logic of Marx extended to that particular, remember he's talking about universal and having to arise in a particular form. It's the logic of Marx, Lenin, Engels, etc., extended to the particular conditions of the U.S. specifically. This is why he's not, we're not just talking about him in the universal sense, but in the particular sense. He's the first one that does this. And I think your paper does this beautifully, just tracking how it works, right? Because it all rests upon the understanding of the category of the black proletariat, right? We make this mistake often where we talk about chattel slavery as some sort of other type of system. But Marx makes it very clear that this is a bourgeois form of slavery in order to create generalized commodity production. So these black enslaved workers are in fact workers creating commodities, creating capital expansion. And so that relationship and understanding them as worker, which none of the socialists of the day did until Du Bois, is massively important. That means everything. Not only that, Du Bois picks up where Marx leaves off in this specific way when he takes that logic of Marx and brings it into the category of the black proletariat. And only through this can we understand what he'll call the problem of the color line. I'm not going to ramble on and on because there's a lot to get over, but it's utterly brilliant. And this category is so goddamn necessary for understanding American history, American class struggle, and therefore where we are today.
You're absolutely. You guys made some really good points. We often say about Michael Parenti, who's another favorite of ours over at the Institute, that he applies the Marxist method, the dialectical historical materialist method, without always saying that's what he's doing, without ever, directly quoting Marx or anything like that. And I see similarities in Du Bois where he was he didn't say that he was providing a Marxist dialectical materialist analysis, but that's what he was doing. And what Carlos brilliantly shows in this paper is that Du Bois was doing that better than a lot of the self-described Marxists and a lot of the self-described socialists, because they were sort of dogmatically applying Marx's analysis to America rather than analyzing the concrete and unique conditions of the American system of slavery and capitalism, and the time period that followed it. What Du Bois does is provide a materialist analysis of the unique conditions in America that was lacking from so many of the self-described Marxists and socialists at the time. And that's why we call him the father of American Marxism, despite the fact that that catches people off guard sometimes, because they know Du Bois wasn't always a Marxist. He didn't join the Communist Party until later in his life. But as Carlos also says, and as Gerald Horne has said in the past, this isn't a break in Du Bois, but a logical continuation of what his theoretical analysis always was. And I also want to bring up the point that a lot of times liberals like to accuse us of being class reductionists, right? And trying to tie everything back to class, which they call class reductionism, and say that, and what they're really saying there is we need to focus more on identity issues and less on class issues. But what Du Bois and Carlos in this excellent article show is that there is no liberation of oppressed groups or oppressed identities without class struggle. Right, the struggle to eliminate slavery and racism and all the Jim Crow and garbage that followed the systematic racism was a form of class struggle. It was a struggle that bettered the material conditions of the black proletariat and the slaves. So it's not class reductionism to bring things back to class. We have to look at the different particular forms that the class struggle takes, which oftentimes is struggles for national self-determination, like what we're seeing in Palestine, struggles against racism. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would even say that the people at the time that were functioning within a very narrow understanding of class, that we're saying, well, this struggle is irrelevant to the struggle of our working class in the North for socialism. It's the tendency of folks is to call them, oh, they're class reductionists. It's the opposite. They're not focusing on class enough. They're, in a way, race reductionists, because they're letting race hinder class unity. And that's has been one of the central factors behind the reason why we haven't been able to have socialism in the US. There's been quite a few of them, but for me, the central one for a very, very long time in US history was racism. The fact that the US elite, the media, and the objective conditions in the country was able to produce an atmosphere in which the ideological understanding of society for itself was upside down. And that's what the essence of ideology as false consciousness entails, that you have objective structures that necessitate that the understanding of those same structures are always distorted. It's an error that, although it appears in the minds of individuals and classes, it is not rooted just in a problem of epistemic hygiene, as one of the scholars that I cite there calls it. It's not just a question of like how am I seeing the world. The error in how we see the world is in the world itself. We live in a world that requires that the people that live in it misunderstand the world that they live in. And this is the essence of false consciousness. And it couldn't be seen more clear than in the fact that this inversion always requires picking on a very superficial truth and making that superficial truth the essential thing, while completely ignoring what's actually essential. And what's a better example of that than telling poor working class white people that what's really essential, what really should matter to them, is that white people are on top, or that white people live in an order where they have these sets of material privileges or whatever, that their lot as a working class white is with the white boss, and not with the people who materially, their lives are almost indistinguishable in many ways, because if you look at the condition of, say, the poor Southern white, and the condition then of the black proletarians was extremely similar. It was extremely similar. The lives of poor whites, poor Southern whites, and those of the slave owners were almost nothing alike. What was alike was this very superficial level of skin color. And that's the power of ideology in the form of what I call racist false consciousness. It's able to make something superficial seem essential, and in so doing, it completely turns the world upside down. And that mistaken view that the world takes of its own self is an indispensable component of class societies, and specifically capitalist class society. And I don't get to this next part in the article because I'm planning my next big work. I'm planning on making it be on the subject of ideology. But those inversions are systematically rooted in capitalism. You can't fix them just by changing your mind. They objectively reproduce themselves constantly, and it's rooted in the most fundamental germ of capitalist society, the commodity, which is itself, the way it reproduces itself is this constant inversion. And that inversion takes a variety of different forms in society, but fundamentally, what we've had in the US is this racist false consciousness that has been the most important tool of the ruling class in dividing working people. And maybe I could stop there, but so that we could discuss that for a little bit. But I think the conclusions are going to be very optimistic, but I'll stop there just so that we can dialogue a bit.
Yeah, I want to mention that the question of racist false consciousness is huge. And what I really love about Du Bois is that he proves that it's not just that, the planters, the slave owners were able to convince everybody that they were more similar to them, but that this arises as a general reflection of the relations of production between white workers and planters at the time, right? That what Du Bois calls the vanity of the poor white worker arises because they're basically used as a middle manager almost, a police force against the black rebel working for the slaver who was clearly responsible for his immiseration in the first place. And the common, I got to do a sort of dad joke here, the common view through modern false consciousness is a resemblance in skin tone rooted in tribalist ideology and silliness, surface level thinking, right? What Du Bois teaches us instead is this relationship as a slave manager, catcher, and the all-around sort of dickhead, whipped and cucked water boy of the slavers identify instead with the slaver, who in turn use the poor whites the way any bourgeoisie use any proletariat, right? Who will become slave driver for them at least. And since the poor black, the enslaved proletariat, was unable to escape his status, and there existed a dream of owning them himself, it strengthened this vanity, right? This creates an inability for the poor Southern white to even see themselves as worker, as similar to the black worker, the only other thing they had an example of. And I think that's super important. And Carlos gives a perfect example of this, even proliferating in the North near the beginning of his essay. And he's talking about this guy, Harrishaw, right? Who is sort of an early American labor leader. And I'm going to quote Carlos here, right? Because it's showing the sort of race essentialism leading to this. Instead of using this as a ground for solidarity with the abolitionist movement, he condemned abolitionists and argued that, quote, the movements on behalf of freedom should be best directed towards the Northern wage workers' emancipation. In Brownson's analysis, which is who he's talking about at the time, the class contradiction between the Southern planter and the Northern capitalist could be exploited on the Northern laborers' behalf by siding with the planters. The freedom of the wage slave was primary for Brownson, and that of the chattel slave only an afterthought. While it's likely that racism played a role in Brown says diminution of the struggle for emancipation from chattel slavery, it is also grounded on an inability to see the struggle for Black emancipation as a labor struggle, as a struggle of fellow workers against capital. The Black slave, in short, was not seen as a Black worker. The fundamental commonality in each's struggle was obscured through the miscategorization of the Black struggle for emancipation as something wholly distinct from the general class struggle for the emancipation of labor from capital. And that is what's key, right? The category of the Black proletariat is everything, because this is still found in a lot of the sort of wokeism of the day. They can't view the struggle against racism as a class struggle, right? They view it as a wholly identity-based struggle rather than the struggle of the Black workers. It's the struggle of the Black people, forcing us into this sort of erasure of class and race essentialism.
And I think this sort of liberal ideology about race manifests itself in a thinker like Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote this book, How to Be Anti-Racist, where he distills racism down to the actions of individuals, essentially, and says that every action is either racist and anti-racist. So we need to work on making all of our individual actions anti-racist so we can combat racism. And, totally missing the point, totally individualizing the systemic problem of racism, and totally failing to realize that humans aren't inherently racist. There's no inherent differences between people of different skin colors. Racism is a tool of the ruling economic class. Racism is a tool that they use to divide the toiling masses and prevent solidarity between them. That is where racism is rooted in. And how do we get rid of racism? We attack it at its root. We attack class society. We attack exploitation. And what these liberal academics do is try and obscure that and say, no, just post a black square on your Instagram and racism will be solved eventually. And it couldn't be more
Eddie,
absurd.
are you telling me that didn't solve racism?
No, it didn't. And that's why Marxism is the ultimate debunk to race essentialist ideology. Both this liberal identity obsessed, sort of wokeism, and, the racist ideas that we have seen come out of the right and come from the imperialists forever.
Both serve the same purpose. One does it from this fake left or this pseudo progressivism, and the other does it from a very overt reactionism. But their philosophical roots are this race essentialism that accepts this thing that was created by capitalist class society, which is race. It ontologizes race. It makes it a reality that's beyond the social construction that it actually is. And it uses it in order to divide working people. And that's the difference fundamentally from Du Bois's theorizing, which is always tied to activism, to being a revolutionary, and the theorizing of people today working within philosophy of race, making appeals to Du Bois, to all these other great thinkers from the Black Freedom Movement, but whose sole purpose is to theoretically proliferate the divisions that the ruling class foists on working people for the sake of continuing to land articles in popular journals with high impact factors, landing books and editorials that belong to universities and therefore are more important for the resume readers, which function as a sort of godly judge group for every academic that, and this is a structural necessity for academics. Some could be stupid enough like me to not care about it. But if they want to be smart and want to have a job, it is a structural necessity that they have to participate in this sort of thing. And if a certain set of ideas is profitable for them in terms of landing articles in the big journals, they have to be fools to not. So it's in their class interest to continue that sort of theorizing. Du Bois wasn't concerned with that. Du Bois was blackballed from academia. He was kicked out of the country. Du Bois was seeking to understand these divisions, not in order to exploit them theoretically for big book contracts, but for the sake of helping these splits, these color lines in the working class, both at home and internationally, mend itself. so that the working class could unite against an order that requires a universal exploitation and oppression of all working people of all colors. As Winston said, the ruling class never divides itself by colors, but it needs the working class that it oppresses and exploits to constantly divide itself by color, by religion, by sex, by orientations, by whatever it is. It needs to constantly divide the people in order to rule them. Without that division, it can't rule them. And one of the central things from Du Bois and his critiques of the generation of quote unquote socialists or labor militants, the Bronsonian style militants that I talk about at the beginning, was that they weren't able to see something that we've been talking about, the necessity of our people seeing when it comes to the ongoing genocide against Palestine, which is that this isn't a moral, just a moralizing issue. It was in the interest of the northern proletariat, of the free soilers, and of the poor southern whites to side with the black proletariat, with the enslaved proletariat. It was in their interest, just like it is in the interest of American working people today to side with Palestine against Israel. And it is only through false consciousness that this objective connection of interest is obscured. And that's our job, is to remove that obscurity, to show something that's very easy to do, which is the overlap of interest between working people of all stripes and the owners of capital that are not divided by race, as Winston says, and that oppress us all, irregardless of race or any background that we might have.
And this is why we need to be very careful of sleek bourgeois theories that try to pass themselves off as revolutionary, but are instead going backwards from where Du Bois takes us, right? That they erase that category of the black proletariat and reducing everything to race essentials, right? When they are furthering those divisions rather than eroding them, they're only serving the ruling class, whether they say it's radical or not. When they are telling you all working people are inherently different and do not share commonality as working people, but are instead antagonistic based on their skin tone, that is very literally reaction. That is going backwards to race science and all that mumbo jumbo about skull sizes that they used to literally tell us was real science, right? And so we need to be able to understand, and Carlos went over this at the beginning of the subject, the difference between universals and particulars and what their relationship is. If we can remember that all universals, such as humanity or the working class, arise in different forms due to different historical particular conditions that create those forms of that thing, then we're golden. We can see the American context creating racism in this way, right? We can see the rise of the class struggle that is the Black freedom movement arising out of chattel slavery and then going into Jim Crow, culminating, well, I shouldn't say culminating, but leading to the civil rights movement, right? After we have the rise of the middle classes, there was this absolute necessity for the continuation of society and the class struggle that implies, for this struggle to again lead the way into the third revolution, which is the civil rights movement, which then lays the ground for right now, where we are right now, where that racist false consciousness is weaker than ever, where this struggle for socialism is within our grasp. We can take it. I'm sorry, like when the hurdles are the fake left, it gets to me, because if they could go back and get Du Bois, we'd all be on the same page. If you ever notice why it's funny that Eddie and Carlos and I all come to very, very similar conclusions, even when we're working separately on things, it's because Marxism must lead to these certain similar conclusions. And that's why we have Du Bois and the creation of American Marxism to lead us into tomorrow.
Yeah, no, that's excellent, and that's the point that I end on. And we can finish with this. It's been a long segment on the article. I
I
have a
gotta
separate.
admit, I did not read the end. I apologize. Carlos and I got carried away talking on the phone. So
Yeah.
sorry.
Imagine that.
But I have a separate video that I filmed in Mexico, walking around a beautiful park in Coyoacan, where I talk about the article. So this won't be the first or last time you hear me talking about it. But I just want to conclude with the fact that although the beginning might be gloomy, where you have this tremendous potential for genuine socialism that arises out of the period of Reconstruction and the dictatorship of the working class, as Du Bois calls it, that's created there. We should not be gloomy by it, because we had the civil rights movement. And in 1964, what occurs is a political revolution. The apartheid fascistic order that we have from the counter-revolution of property in 1876 onwards, where lynching is the order of the day, and systematically, de jure, white workers are separated from black workers. That's overthrown in 1964, de jure. And it's taken some decades for it to um, be a de facto reality in large parts of the country. There's still parts that are plagued by the birthmarks of um, of the color line, and of segregation, but the vast majority of the country has been relatively integrated. It's hard to imagine, even in the most backwards parts of the country, that a white working class person still considers their black coworker to be ontologically inferior to them, and therefore not worthy of fighting together against their boss for a common economic end that affects their quotidian life more than anything else, more than race, sex, more than any other thing. So, we live in an era that's post the BLM protest, and we can have all the critiques we want of those, but the reality is 35 million Americans hit the streets because they felt like they killed one of us. Um, they killed MLK, and people didn't do that. And this was just a random black man that they killed and that they did that with. There was recently two Tennessee representatives that were kicked out of their congressional position because they protested with the students against gun violence, and it was a very clearly racially motivated. They're white um, uh, fellow congressperson who protested with them wasn't kicked out, but it was the two young black kids that were. This caused national outrage, and within less than 2 weeks, they were put back in their positions. Again, it shows two things. It shows that racism is still alive, but it shows that the balance of forces has switched. That the vast majority of Americans today are more in favor of militating against these appearances of racism than those that are in favor of militating in favor of sustaining them. And that means that the main factor that has prevented the unity of the working class for a common project of conquering political power and radically transforming American society into a socialist society, that main factor, which was racist false consciousness, is largely overthrown. And there's black scholars that have been working in this area for a long time. People like Adolph Reed, Toure Reed, his son, Anthony Montero, who I cite a few times in the paper. So today, our reasons can't be copied and pasted from the 1940s or 1950s. We can no longer say that we can't have socialism in the US because our working class is backwards, or it's because of racism, or even because of the middle class, because the middle class has been reproletarianized. If we want to look for the reason why we don't have socialism or a significant movement towards socialism right now, we have to look inwards as a left, as socialists. We can't anymore point at our working classes backwards. We have to ask what within the left has prevented it from organizing a working class that in terms of objective conditions is more fertile than we've ever had in the history of this country. And the thesis that I have made, and I'm sure you all know this, we've talked about it a million times, is that it's the purity fetish. So in a way, this project is in line with the other stuff that I've written on the purity fetish, because at its core is always an attempt to understand why aren't we succeeding in the struggle for socialism? How can we understand what are the factors hindering that struggle, and how can we overcome them? I show that it's racism for a very big part of our history, the middle classes for another part. Today it's the left, which of course it's a left that's been created by the State Department, and we all know the Congress for Cultural Freedom and all these different things. But today we can only look inwards if we want to see the reason why we're not advancing. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you for that quick point, Carlos. I think we should move on to our next and probably final segment now, unless anybody has some super chat questions or even videos that they want us to react to quick. We can hit those, but there was a leaked document that came out today, circling back to Palestine, from Israeli intelligence, which says they plan to move 2 million Palestinians to Egypt. So they plan on displacing the Palestinian people en masse. This is a sort of wild leaked document that the Israeli authorities have now been trying to lie about and cover up, of course. But I mean, this is what's been going on forever. Over 70% of Palestinian people are already living in refugee status. That's because of the Nakba, because of the original seizure of Palestinian land, which displaced so many of them. And what a lot of people have called what Israel's currently doing is an ongoing Nakba, right? The Nakba means the calamity, and that's what the Palestinians call it. And it was the original seizure of their land and the forcing of them off of their land. And what's going on now is an ongoing Nakba, continuing to seize more and more land, kill more Palestinians, and force more of them off. And this is a perfect example of that, as Israeli intelligence is now planning to displace over 2 million people. So here's a quick video I did about it on the old talk.
Eddie, before you play that, I just want to say one quick thing, and this will be quick, I promise. It is one of the most tragic things I've ever seen in my life, to have the people that were writ large the victims of the Holocaust engage in the exact same things the Nazis were doing to us. People who should know better. The mass deportation and relocation is precisely the move that the Nazis tried before they went to their final solution of extermination, right? And so the parallels between that, between the way they speak of the Palestinian people, between that and the sort of easy racism of the entire populace, the way, I mean, I don't know if anyone's seen the TikTok videos that are popular there now, but they're just absolutely disgusting. It's all like step by step what the Nazis were doing to Jews, you know? And so it's so tragic. I don't know.
Yes, let's play this video now. If I can unmute the page.
Holy crap. A leaked document from the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence revealed that they plan to transfer more than 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza and into Egypt's Sinai Desert. For those who don't know, over 70% of Palestinians are already living in refugee status because they've been pushed off their land by the Israeli apartheid state. And now Israel plans on displacing 2 million more of them, as they've killed over 8,000 Palestinians in the last few weeks. And what's crazy is Israel plans on harnessing the international community to get them to support this mass displacement of Palestinians. And by the international community, they essentially mean the US and their allies, who have basically pledged to support Israel unconditionally. I mean, Joe Biden has already sponsored the murder of almost 3,000 Palestinian children, so why wouldn't he support the displacement of another 2 million Palestinians? The White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, literally called advocates for peace in Palestine disgraceful and repugnant. Obviously, this is an administration who is going to back Israel no matter what kind of violence they inflict on the Palestinian population. It's just insane that the so-called protectors of freedom and democracy are supporting something so obviously heinous, murderous, and disgusting. But that's the nature of the US empire. Pretend to be the good guys while suppressing and murdering all of your enemies.
So the first thing that pops into my mind is exactly what Noah said. This is literal Nazi shit that now so many Jewish people are supporting and cheering on, that the U.S. is supporting and cheering on, despite the fact that we always like to brag, back-to-back World War champs, baby. We defeated the Nazis. Well, guess what? Now we're funding them and sponsoring their genocides.
I mean, we're funding Nazi, or I shouldn't say we, they, the ruling class. Every time they've never met a Nazi they didn't like. They got basically forced into World War II. And really, let's be for real, the Soviets won that war. Right now, they literally create and prop up the Maidan coup, putting neo-Nazis in charge of Ukraine to wage their proxy war against Russia. And now this.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to see what the reaction from the Muslim world is going to be. A big chunk of it exists outside of the sphere of influence of empire, which doesn't mean it's not influenced by imperialism. Even the countries that are outside of the influence are influenced, like Cuba or something. You know, it's the condition it's in is very much influenced by imperialism. But it's a technical term in the Leninist tradition, which means that it's a government that does not respond to imperialism directly. And a lot of the Muslim world is in that condition where it is not socialist, but it is also outside of the imperialist camp. And you know, you've had Iran say that if this onslaught continues, they're going to have to intervene. Other Muslim majority countries have, you know, showed similar sentiments, and there's a lot of them whose leaders haven't, but whose people have. So I'm just, you know, how long are they going to let this keep going? I know that it's difficult repeating a lot of these things. You know, I've had what feels like the same conversation 3,000 times over the last 24 days. But repetitio est mater studiorum. You know, repetition is the mother of all knowledge. And there's a lot of people who perhaps are hearing this angle for the first time. We know it's not an angle they get in mainstream media, but we have to keep this as the centerpiece of our analysis. There's a literal genocide being waged against our brothers and sisters in Palestine. So all attention, or the vast majority of our attention, has to be focused on this issue. And you know, let's see, because we've had tremendous protests, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, and nothing has came out of it so far. And that's what scares me. You know, our ruling class does not respond to the American people. And this is shown statistically. The American people can fully agree with something and it won't pass, and they can fully disagree with something and it will pass. You know, the only people who the ruling class responds to is the elite that funds their campaign and whose class interests they represent. So how do we move forward stopping a genocide that is funded by our government's $3.4 billion that it gives to Israel yearly, when our government doesn't listen to us? Because it's not really a government of, by, and for the people, as it says it's supposed to be. So these have been the difficulties, at least, that I've been, you know, we're doing everything or what it seems to be everything we can, and this onslaught is continuing. So I don't know, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I've been sort of thinking about this for a while now. I mean, y'all know me, I've been in this a long time, and lately, rallies, demonstrations, protests, they start to just get me depressed, because we pour all this effort in, right? And nothing comes of it. When we were talking about Du Bois, we were talking about George Floyd, the protests after he was murdered, biggest in American history. What changed? Not a goddamn thing. The ruling class not only doesn't listen to us, but has figured out a way to use our own anger at them in their own service. They use this like a sort of pressure release valve, as Carlos says, right? That we are taught, well, when you're upset, you go protest. You have a right to protest. Go right on ahead. And they ignore us, or they give us some symbolic thing like naming a street Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue, right? Or putting up a statue of George Floyd. But that's not the point. And here's the one silver lining, though, I think. We're not alone in seeing this. People all over are doing this, and they're seeing the same thing. The ruling class ain't listening. So it's time to step up our game. For me, and I've been talking about this a little bit lately, this is a symbol that it's time for us, specifically us, to get together a Congress of revolutionaries all over the country. Get in one place and put all the pettiness, the childishness, the sectarianism, all the bickering and arguing and canceling aside and in the past, come together and say, we need change right now. So how do we do it?
Yeah, the only place where I would disagree with you is when you said nothing has changed from the BLM protests, which what has changed is the ruling class's tactics, as you explained yourself. You know, they've co-opted what we call wokeism and progressive slogans, but it's all identity based, right? There's been no effort by the ruling class to roll back imperialism or better the economic conditions of Black Americans, and they've increasingly militarized the police, you know. But they've changed their strategy in the way they manipulate people. They pretend to be progressive. They put a progressive veneer on the horrific acts of exploitation and imperialism that are committed by the American government and the American ruling class every day. And, you know, that creates a need for us to develop these concepts like wokeism that can explain how the ruling class is using identity politics to distract from class struggle, which is, you know, what can actually bring about change. Yeah, you guys want to cover these super chats here, or you got more to say?
Well, I mean, just a quick point, which is that while structurally and in terms of policy stuff hasn't been changing, there's been a lot of minds and hearts that have, especially amongst the youth. You know, the fact that we can get pro-Palestine videos to millions of views on TikTok, the most popular app in the country, it's hard to imagine that could have happened, you know, sometime after the invasion of Iraq or something. So those are areas where they have changed, but there's a contradiction here. You know, there's the changing hearts and minds of the people, especially young people, and then the rigidity of the politics of capital in our era. Something's got to give. You know, this can't continue like this for a very long time. At some point, something has to happen. It cannot structurally contain this contradiction for a long period of time.
Absolutely. Andrew Ray, thank you so much for the $10 super chat, Andrew Ray. Appreciate that. All of our institute funding comes from you, the audience, and that's why we were only beholden to the people, not any corporate donors, unlike the politicians who run this country. But liberal freedom of speech means you can talk about an issue all day long, so long as you don't do anything meaningful about solving it. Definitely. And some of the communists in Mexico, I know, are telling Carlos, to the extent that we can use the American Constitution to protect ourselves, we should. You know, we should say this is violating our constitutional rights when they shut us down and stuff like that. But absolutely, I mean, our TikTok account is doing well right now. We're up to 110,000 followers again. But every time we've gotten about that big, we get banned, we get shut down. And that's because the US government realized what was going on TikTok. They realized that the algorithm wasn't suppressing anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist content. So they forced TikTok to hand over their American servers to a company in Texas called Oracle, who proceeded to censor everybody. So absolutely, you get freedom of speech until you start really doing some damage. Thank you to Battle Cossack. Anime YouTubers have a strong hatred towards China. They freak out about videos and they call you a propagandist. I mean, that's a lot of people in the entertainment world. A lot of people are completely brainwashed by anti-communist propaganda. Right now, I'm actually reading Michael Parenti's book about the entertainment media and the way that entertainment media puts ideas and plants ideas in people's heads and helps to sculpt people's worldview or invent reality, is the word Parenti says. So I'm not, I don't watch many anime YouTubers, but I'm not surprised that phenomena exists there too.
It creates all the background assumptions that verify the narratives they need to tell.
Yes. Americans don't believe in their own democracy anymore, according to the polls. It's no longer viable, and we should explore alternate forms of government. Absolutely. It's that's what Carlos said, or part of what Carlos calls the crisis of legitimacy that our ruling class is suffering right now, where I don't know what the number is, but the vast majority of Americans don't believe Congress works for them. It's like 17% of them trust Congress. A similar amount trust the media. Like, people know we are constantly lied to and constantly fed propaganda. One of the hardest things is getting people to see that we can actually do something about it, that we can actually organize and through class struggle bring about change. But it's not, like we said, the ruling class doesn't respond to us when we ask them for things. We have to demand things. It's class struggle, not class begging. Because if we beg, they're never going to give us anything. We have to be organized. We have to be strong, and we have to seek political power, which is another thing that Carlos explains in the Purity Fetish, and it's harped on. Is there's so many socialists who are against seizing power. Anytime a working class has a revolution and takes power, all of a sudden, oh, no, I don't support them. I only support Thomas Sankara and Allende in Chile because they got killed. It's like, well, you should still support them even if they would have survived, and if they would have started to construct socialism like Cuba and Venezuela and China, Vietnam, Laos, all these other countries. So we need to think about how we can practically advance the class struggle and look to seize political power, because that's the only way to bring about change. Another super chat from the Yankee Tanky. They're flooding in now towards the 2-hour mark of the stream. Appreciate you all for the super chats, for funding our institute. Patreon is the other way to do that, by the way. I always feel I should mention that, but DC, like truckers did in Ottawa, Canada, all of a sudden you'll see those in power forced to listen to us, right? And that's why in Canada they cut off those truckers like bank accounts, right? They had to hit them where it hurts economically, because the truckers were hitting them where it hurts economically. They were blocking off trade routes, which is vital to the appropriation of surplus value by the ruling capitalist class, and what we call the realization of capital. So you got to hit them where it hurts, their pocketbook.
Can I just say one thing on this?
Yeah, I'm done. Quick? Sorry.
No, it's all good, brother. The way we protest is so incredibly important, because the Yankee Tanky here is correct. The truckers in Ottawa did that correctly. You see all these videos of protesters from these giant NGOs, and there's like 10 of them, and they're laying down in the middle of a highway. Which highways are those? That's important. Are they the ones where everybody in that city is on their way home from work and is just going to hate you? Or are they tactically sound trading hubs, right? There is one way to get to the Amazon distribution center in Cleveland. One way. Now imagine if we took that street instead of the Route 2 highway, which we took when Tamir Rice was killed. Big difference. We piss off the ruling class rather than the working class. we escalate that way, but we're gaining support in doing that and showing everyone watching who the enemy is. And it ain't them. It's Amazon, right? Sorry.
Ding, ding,
That
ding.
was an
Yeah,
amazing point. Sorry.
yeah. That's so true, dude. Because for most regular working people, they're just trying to get to work. They see a protest is gonna make them fucking hate whatever position they're protesting for even more. So instead of fucking up regular people's days who are just trying to get to work, go block off one of the leading companies that's in charge. And some people have done it. There have been protests in front of the offices of some of the biggest military contractors that are behind the funding of Israel and the sending of weaponry to Israel. So those sorts of activities are essential. But yeah, there's got to be like a science of protesting that we must do to analyze what ways are more effective and what ways just end up pissing off regular people whom we should try to get on our side instead of the opposite.
Absolutely. There are certain pressure points in the economy that we can exploit and utilize to our own advantage, just like the ruling class does, just like they blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline because it was a form of trade that was hurting them. Sam Dixon says doing a presentation tomorrow for Danny's class on the PFLP strategy for the liberation of Palestine. Badass. So happy to hear that. So happy to see that Danny's class is doing very well. There are lots of people in there learning. Knowledge gives us power. Knowledge equals power. I can't stress that enough. Do not listen to the people who tell you not to read theory or reading and studying isn't important. They are lying. They themselves need to sit down and read some theory. Understanding theory and understanding history is how you see through the ruling class's lies and place yourself on the right side of history, on the right side of the class struggle, which, of course, in this situation is on the side of Palestinian liberation.
There's nothing more annoying to me than some middle-class college kid telling me workers ain't got time to read. All right? Treating me like I'm stupid because my parents ain't rich.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well,
I read
I'm
more
so-
than these kids do in their entire college career. And I do
True.
it on my own while working full time. All right? You got time to read. We all got time to educate ourselves if our hearts are in this.
1,000%. 95% of the reading a lot of these college kids do is on Twitter. But I want to say I'm extremely proud of Sam, a hard-proven
Absolutely.
student of the institute. He was in my Marxism and the History of Western Philosophy class. Wonderful student. I think he was in Noah's class as well, and he was in Danny's Reformer Revolution class, and now he's leading his own presentation on Palestine for this basically workshop. It's not a full class because it's only been 2 weeks, but this workshop with Danny, and that's just beautiful to see. If I can encourage anyone listening, is that listen, but have as an ultimate goal at some point to do stuff also, whether it's doing on the ground work or whether it's educating people, writing articles for your favorite Marxist websites, cough, Midwestern Marx, or teaching class, like volunteer, act. Don't wait until you think you have the most perfect knowledge of everything to do stuff. That's such a paralyzing force. The purity fetish, and this is something that Eddie's always emphasizing, and we always talk about how relevant it is for sports issue. The purity fetish is paralyzing, not just at the level of politics and analysis, but at the everyday level. Like if you wait until the perfect moment to do something, you're never going to get it done. And if you wait until you have the perfect technique to try something out in a match or something, you're never gonna. So it's so important that we learn by doing. And I think that sort of development, we're seeing it very clearly in Sam and in a host of other folks who have been kind of trained through the institute.
And
For
Sam,
sure.
I really want to see a recording of this, so make sure you get it, brother. Send it to us. You have all our emails.
For sure. This is my article on the purity fetish applied to the sport of wrestling, if anybody's
Love
interested.
This article is fantastic. Everybody should read it. Super good.
Thank you.
What Eddie does here, applying theory to everyday life, is what we should all be doing.
For sure, and it's really helped me a lot as a wrestler, I swear. So check it out. You might think it's interesting. I found a lot of places where I can apply the purity fetish in my own life. My dad struggles with perfectionism and upholding himself to a perfectionist standard, and the purity fetish has helped him sort of cut himself some slack and realize that you're never going to be perfect, although you can strive for perfection. But shout out to Wade, another $5 super chat. Thank you, Wade, friend of the show, someone who helps us out here at the Institute for totally free, of course. Or look, right now he's even paying us. But thank you so much, Wade. Says cloud infrastructure, the socialization of the IT industry holds the key to establishing and automating revolutionary infrastructure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we need to utilize new forms of technology in any way that we can. And I mean, this is a very Marxist concept, the idea that the advancement of the forces of production will allow new revolutionary methods and new methods of class struggle to come about. It's exactly what we're seeing with the rise of the internet, and it's exactly why the ruling class is now scrambling to censor the internet in every way that they possibly can.
Mm.
That's 100% right, and that's why it's almost like a different form of the same thing. Because when the Bolshevik Revolution happened, one of the things that Lenin stressed is that we need people who could do like regular functional shit that's needed for the survival of this type of society. And in our type of society, it's going to mean that socialist communist parties and we have to have people who can do that sort of stuff, who are trained in that, so that when we grab power, it's not just people learning through YouTube videos how to do this sort of thing and obviously not functioning as well as the previous bourgeois order was in these areas. So that's why we criticize professionals, and we should criticize the role that they've taken in socialist organizations, but they play an important role. These technicians and these technical expertise are essential for the building of a new world order.
You will only ever see me say one positive thing about Leon Trotsky. This is it. Right before the seizure of power, it was his idea to make sure there were Bolsheviks in the management of all key economic sectors. So the mail, transportation, news, et cetera, things like this. It was Trotsky who said, we need our people in there so things go smoothly. We take power and there's not a lot of violence, which I know it's surprising for Trotsky to not call for murdering everybody, but that's what he did right there. Only positive thing about him. Everything else is horrible, down to his stupid face.
Oh, I couldn't have said it better myself. That was perfect. Yeah, anyone else got any topics they want to hit before we log off here? Definitely share. Get us 40,000.
Oh yeah. Eddie's gonna do the one chip challenge along with Danny, who will do it live with Tom Riggins in Tom's apartment. So if you want to see an 82-year-old do the one chip challenge, make sure to get us to
for 50K. I will do it twice.
Oh, watch, our subscriber counts is gonna shoot through the roof.
And I'm gonna be in the hospital.
They're gonna unsubscribe because they know it's a suicidal mission.
They don't want us to kill Tom.
My God. Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's what I was gonna say. There's a good question here. It's not a super chat, but maybe. I don't know if you guys have interacted with it quite a bit, but Yanis Varoufakis, he's got this theory of techno-feudalism that holds that we've had a transition to rents and these forms of interactions through these like Netflix and subscription-based accounts that in terms of the economic relations resemble feudalism a lot more than they do commodity production and capitalism. I think one of the central errors in this is the inability to see how it is that every mode of life, by that I mean like every specific mode of production that creates this whole system of relations that are not just the economic ones, is always going to contain a dominant mode of production and then other auxiliary modes of productions. And the mode of production of feudalism and feudal rents, it doesn't disappear once capitalism takes root. It just ends up taking a distinctively capitalist form. And rents is a central part of the discussion in the third volume of Capital. And in other parts of Marx's Bois, it is as well. So capitalism has always had a component that has very much resembled the relations of accumulation within feudalism. The only thing is that now, thanks to technology, it's able to intensify that component. But we're still living in monopoly capitalism, baby. Perhaps a higher stage of it, but it's still capitalism. We're not in techno-feudalism. That's kind
Yeah.
of absurd in my view.
Well, let me just
Agreed.
say on this, because I actually read a part of. I was looking for it on my shelf. I couldn't find it. I read a little bit of his book. I haven't read the whole thing. Just full disclosure. And Carlos is right. I would like to expand by saying land rents and sort of resource extraction production, like mining, right, has always been a holdover from feudalism. The entire school of classical economics was trying to get around this problem of land, right, as property, trying to resolve that contradiction. And you can't do it with bourgeois thinking. Now, one of the other things that Varoufakis forgets is the way capital is accumulated is not the same as in feudalism, right? So that connection is strenuous already. Then we go into we're not even in generalized commodity production being the standard form of capital accumulation anymore. It is instead, in our era, speculation, right? Commodity production in 2023 serves speculation rather than the other way around. And that change is huge, right? That is what creates the forces of production outmoding the old relations of production. And you'll be able to read about this in my reproletarianization pamphlet. That speaking of perfectionism is why it ain't done yet. I was just talking to Carlos today about actually getting back to it now that I'm not busy at work and forcing myself through it. So that's all explained in a theoretical sense. If you're interested in that sort of thing and where we are and what the hell the reproletariat is.
Absolutely. And Peter says, thank you for the response about the techno-feudalism question. You bet. Thanks for asking an awesome question, Peter. And I do like Yanis Varoufakis, and he has some very valuable insights. And he's been totally opposed to the state of Israel, which is just awesome to see because so many non-communist leftists have been disappointing. So,
to say the least, disappointing is a very small word.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
anybody got any? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Carlos.
No, I was just going to say that as I went to go handle something off camera, I didn't want it to be implied that I think that Varoufakis is stupid or something. I think he's brilliant, and the work he's done in showing, and in terms of like empirical data, how these things have changed is just tremendous. But I think at the theoretical level, so at the level of once we participate in these concrete abstractions, I think the conclusion that he comes down to is ultimately incorrect. So yeah, I just wanted to say that because I do like Varoufakis.
For sure.
I think it's sad that we have to make that disclaimer these days.
Right.
You can't disagree with somebody without being like, I don't want them to die, though.
Right. Like, we all love the guy. We're all like, we consider him, I mean, maybe not one of us, but similar and aligned, you know? So, like, it's funny that when we criticize his theory, we have to go, but don't, like, go attack him. You know?
His biggest flaw is that he's still friends with Zizek. who is
That's a
sheepdog.
very big flaw, though. I mean,
That is.
That is
Zizek should
right.
just embrace his true calling and become a garbage man.
mm,
The trash
he
panda.
is a garbage man. I mean,
He would end up
he's
eating
like a
out of the
garbage
garbage
hyphen
cans.
man, like a man made of garbage.
We already are eating from the trash can of ideology.
It's like he was bitten by a radioactive garbage.
Radioactive garbage raccoon. Um, no, it's sad because I mean he's not stupid. We can say whatever we want, but he's not stupid, and that's why it's sad because these are people that if they weren't like opportunists, um, could be playing an important role. Like the intellectuals play an important role
Mm.
in revolutionary struggles. Working class people don't have the time unless you're Noah and wake up at 4 to sit there and systematically analyze all of these different things. You know, we have a role. This other anti-intellectualism position as well is stupid. Like, oh, it's just no. Intellectuals have a role in social revolutions.
Well, I mean,
The problem is that
people.
the ones that we have are confused about what that role is, and often throw their lot in with the ruling class instead of with the movement of working and oppressed peoples.
Yeah, people discount that all the time. Like you don't even think about Martin Luther King Jr. as an intellectual, right? But that's precisely what he was. The man was utterly brilliant. You can read, and don't just read his speeches, read his writing. So very good. Like you could tell he came from Hegel, and you could tell he came from Christianity, and that together. I mean, alone. I don't want to get into it. We'll be here all night. Let's get to this last question, and then y'all know it's like basically 2 a.m. for me. So,
Oh, geez. We want to get into this right now.
Oh, we can.
maybe not. I
He's
Read
do.
Carlos' book.
I do go into him and Werner Sombart and modern bourgeois ideology, linking it all to sort of Nazism. So, if you're wondering where we stand on him, we are very against his anti-communism, his lies, and his entire theory is wrong.
I read Settlers, by the way, and I swear to you guys, I really tried to go in with an open mind, and I really tried to glean the rational kernel from it. And there are good points and good analyses of like American history riddled in that book, but his thesis is just wrong. And he doesn't back it up with good evidence or sources, like this idea that the American proletariat is inherently divided by race, and we can't unify and work together to turn America into something better. I mean, that ideology is everything that we're against. It's defeatist. It just says we'll wait for third world countries who are under the boot of imperialism to have revolutions while Americans just sit on our asses and do nothing. It is one of the most ridiculous, counterproductive theses pumped out by a self-described communist in the last 50 years. And I'd be shocked if it wasn't being boosted by various, NGOs or ruling class arms.
That's why this article from our friend Skeptomai is important because it shows, what people like Gabriel Rocco would call the political economy of knowledge behind settlers and its proliferation. There's a lot of State Department interests that are behind this, and I think it's apparent to anyone who reads it and who knows about this work that um, it's hard to imagine there isn't something behind it, because the goal of the ruling class is always to divide working people, and the substance of this book is to divide working people where I think the struggle matters most, not because of some American exceptionalism or some bullshit, but because we live in the global hegemon or former hegemon as we're entering into a post-hegemonic world order. We're in the belly of the beast, and our struggle is heightened because of the fact that if we destroy the beast, we allow the rest of the world to flourish peacefully. So if you divide workers here, you're playing the role of not just preventing a struggle in a country, but you're fettering the struggles around the world, because the whole world, the global south, is cheering for us not to have these defeatist third worldist positions that leave us, as Eddie said, with sitting on our asses waiting for them. The global south wants us to do a revolution here at home, to overthrow empire so that they can breathe.
Absolutely, 1000%, brother. And Marius Trotter brings up something incredibly important here. When we read this book, many people don't think, is he lying to me? Should I check these sources? Well, sources, right? Should I check what he's saying? I went and tried to do this. He manipulates statistics in order to lie about them and tell sort of like his thing about saying, and Wade brought this up right here. He says white people are in decline, but doesn't recognize the sort of ideological problems of the color line withering and creating intermarrying. Then anyway, I don't want to get into that. He straight up makes up quotes and says they're from Lenin. He tries to paint the chairman of the Communist Party as just like the KKK by using only a portion of a quote, then taking it out of context and lying about the rest. So he takes what is actually an anti-racist quote and tries to turn it into a racist one, right? The entire thing is full of lies.
It's so bad.
Yeah, it's really, 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 really bad.
It is so bad. I really respect Hakeem, and I know he recommended it at some point, but I think that's just, he's from Iraq. He doesn't know American conditions, and he didn't think, maybe this guy's lying to me. Maybe I need to double check his sources. He just kind of took it at face value and was like, oh, yeah, maybe Americans are divided because of race, which is a fair point to make. But the way Sakai does it and says that the white proletariat is a bunch of settlers who can never unify with the proletariat of other races and identity groups it's a thesis that makes me so mad to even think about. It's just a terrible way to view the world too. Like if you live in America, yeah, we hate our government. There's all these things that are wrong with our system. We know this, and that's what we struggle against. But if you go to work every day and see your coworkers as a bunch of evil, racist, settler Nazis, like that's just a very depressing and doomeristic way to view the world that I just simply don't buy into at all. I
not
think
even
people are
real.
good.
Like,
I believe most people are good. Sorry.
That's not how it is. But what drives me fucking crazy is this guy calls himself a Marxist. He doesn't even know what the proletariat is. According to Marxism, he literally calls the proletariat the most downtrodden people, which is so reductive and stupid. And he tries to make some anarchistic like argument for doing that rather than, the entire explanation of the rise of the proletariat as a reflection of changes in production that Marx does and takes like hundreds of pages at least to do. And then he tries to claim Marxism after that when, oh God, I'm blanking. What was I about to say? It doesn't matter. It's crazy.
Well, that's where the importance of the communist intellectual would come in, because these are books that one specifically is not in the academy, but it's influenced by other books that are within the academy. But it never stays in the academy. It always, as Comrade Reagan would say, it trickles down. And what does it trickle down through? Well, through the academy itself, through the NGOs, and through the media. And, sooner or later, this nut job that was maybe known by a handful of Maoists in the academy, some undergrad students, is now being recommended by YouTube accounts and being read by a bunch of American people who are turning towards trying to fight against the system and who are now given a book that would make them impotent. So the role of the academic, the communist one, would be to take all of these frauds, destroy them, so that if it ever does trickle down, there's the alternative ready to hand that can defeat it.
That was the exact point I was going to make, because I said I'm amazed that nobody in our audience is defending Sakai right now, because that hasn't always been the case. right? It used to
Very
be like
true.
you would bring up Sakai and you would, make any critique of him, and all of a sudden you'd have 30 Maoists calling you a settler and a patsock and blah, 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 which, a lot of those elements have sort of been purged from our audience, I guess. But also, like, we've talked to people, very dedicated and good, well-read communists whose minds we've changed about this. We've showed them the failure and defeatism that's in Sakai's thesis. And that's the importance of fighting these ideological battles. And I know some people ask, why do you spend so much time criticizing the left? We're criticizing it because we want it to be successful, right? Self-criticism is extremely important, and deciding on a political program and on political theory is vitally important. And, this has been a learning experience for me. All the work that our friend Skeptomai has done, all the work that Carlos and Noah have done, dismantling this thesis has really revealed to a lot of people what's wrong with it, which is the importance of fighting these theoretical battles, like Carlos said, so that the NGOs and the ruling class can't use these things to manipulate the working class. What the hell is this?
Are you sure Noah's not a settler? Look at that picture of Noah, circa 1780.
I forgot about that. My son made that my contact picture in his phone, by the way.
Noah's literally a settler.
A big pilgrim hat.
He came here on the Mayflower. Holy shit. That's
And that's like also one of the things. First of all, it's Sakai, right? He's a man of international mystery. We're not allowed to see his face or anything like that. He doesn't account for the fact that maybe 2% of people living in the U.S. right now are actually descended from the original settlers. Like, the errors are just like countless and glaring. And the problem is that we're trained to sort of, if it can verify a preconception and seem correct on the surface, because it does touch on real problems of the racial strife in this country. Right?
Right. It does. Yeah. Like there are true things riddled throughout that book.
Right, exactly. You add the lies in with that to give that false conclusion, and please put that back up.
It's literally, for those who don't know, this is an AI picture that AI gave us of Noah. I'm like, oh, now I know why they call him a settler.
Why is that me?
It's the highest AI. By the way, there was almost a split that would have destroyed Midwestern Marx. I don't think we've ever talked about it on
Should
stream.
we bring that up, Eddie? I'm still a little sensitive about it.
Since we've gotten into the real meat and potatoes of our ideological struggles today.
All right, but a couple months ago, my wife's car was stolen. There have been rumors that it was Eddie who did it, but they're not true. Okay? You may have or may not have seen pictures. They've been doctored.
Actually, it was in fact me. I pulled the wool over everybody's eyes for a long time, but Noah said I could have his car. So that's the reason that I took his car and his cat. He told me that I could. And, Noah has been alleging.
Okay, wait. The cat was in the car and Eddie took it anyway. And that's the problem. And that's not even the only problem. Once he had the cat, he was allowing it to smoke weed and go to parties and use vulgar language. And that shit ain't right. All right?
I mean, listen, we believe in liberation, right? And liberation is when you can do drugs and party and engage in degenerate behavior. So I liberated Noah's cat from his dictatorial Soviet-esque regime that he runs at his house. And I make no apologies for liberating the feline proletariat.
There's a picture of the cat smoking pot too.
Yeah,
I couldn't find that one.
That one was really good.
Tragic photo to see how such an integrated group can be destroyed. But well, that's what happens when we stream for more than 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Here's
There's
me and
the
Noah's cat FaceTiming Travis Scott while he smokes marijuana.
There's one where the cat's wearing like a hat that says bitch.
I think you made that one.
I wish I could. I can look for it, but I don't feel like going through my Twitter.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So sorry, guys. We had to split. But I think people will understand.
Those people mad in the comments, which is perhaps the most absurd thing of this. People taking.
True. People were like, guys, you can't split over this. It seems like, very minor. Like, tell Eddie to just give back Noah's wife's car.
There are people who believed us, like commenting on this tweet.
Too good.
Read that out loud, Eddie. Read it out loud. The guy that.
Oh yeah, this one is fun. Eddie has broken a binding DNS we all signed regarding the many photos of him stealing my wife's car. Worse, my cat was in the car as he stole it, and he has since been sending pictures of him allowing it to go to parties, use drugs, and engage in vulgar language. The car theft was one thing. We could have gotten over such a schism, as I am a forgiving man. But we never allow the cat to smoke marijuana and use vulgar language. There are phone records and screenshots of every Snapchat he sent. I got your cat, sucker, was not funny, Eddie.
There's someone in the chat who thinks this is real.
Come on, Sebastian.
The fuck? My God. We have degenerated a perfectly good stream.
Yeah.
It was a great stream. Thank you to all our super chatters and all our viewers, our moderators, Ware Pilgrim, Cobra, Jacob. Appreciate the crap out of all of you. Follow us everywhere. Patreon.com/Midwestern Marks if you want to support us financially.
I'm done playing the
outro. Oh man.
Anything else to say, guys, before we roll the outro?
420 lives. Jesus.
That is
Christ.
good.
All right, this is where Marxism happens, folks. We love you all. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you, and we'll go out the same way we came in, with the glorious international peace.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of